The large conference hall was filled with a soft hum of voices, the kind that comes before something important is about to happen. Hundreds of people had gathered, their eyes fixed on the tall stage where Sundar Pichai stood. He was in the middle of his speech, his calm voice speaking about technology, about the future, about the ways people could connect and help each other in a fast-changing world. Outside, the rain was falling gently, tapping against the tall glass windows. The air inside was warm, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted in from a corner where servers were moving quietly. The lights were bright, but soft, casting a glow over Sundar as he paused for a moment to glance at his notes. The audience leaned forward slightly, waiting for his next words, and then something happened. The door at the far end of the room opened. Slowly, a figure stepped in, moving with quiet dignity. It was an elderly woman, her steps measured but sure. Her sari was simple, a soft cream color with a faded border, and her silver hair was tied neatly back. She walked without hurry, as if the whole room had all the time in the world for her. At first, only a few people noticed. Then more heads turned. The quiet grew deeper. Sundar's eyes followed theirs, and when he saw her, his voice caught mid-sentence. His hands froze on the podium. It was Hiraba. She had no introduction. She didn't need one. She was known not for wealth or fame, but for the kind of quiet strength that leaves a mark on everyone it touches. Her presence felt like the sudden stillness before the first drop of rain on a summer day, unexpected, gentle, yet powerful enough to shift the air in the room. Sundar's mind flashed back 2 years ago, to a time when his own journey had been full of doubts and questions. He remembered stories he had heard of her resilience, her kindness, her deep humility, even when life had not been easy. He had never met her in person before, yet her name had always carried a weight in his mind. She walked down the center aisle, slowly, her eyes scanning the room, not for faces of power, but for something simpler, human warmth. There was a grace in the way she moved, as if each step carried a story. Sundar found himself stepping back from the podium slightly, his prepared words slipping away like water through open fingers. The audience, sensing something special, did not speak. Some stood without being asked. Phones that had been raised for photos were lowered, almost instinctively, as if taking a picture would somehow lessen the moment. When she reached the front row, she did not take the reserved seat with the name tag. Instead, she chose an empty chair at the side, near a young volunteer who was holding a tray of water glasses. She smiled at the boy, her expression soft and genuine, and the boy's nervousness seemed to vanish. Sundar knew the speech could wait. This was not the kind of moment you talked over. This was the kind of moment you let breathe. He set his notes aside, stepped away from the podium, and walked down the stage stairs. The audience watched, some holding their breath. As he approached her, "I am honored," he said softly, his voice carrying across the room, even without the microphone. She looked up at him, her eyes steady but kind, and gave the smallest nod. That was when Sundar realized this meeting was not just a chance encounter. It was going to change something in him, maybe in everyone here. He didn't yet know how, but he could feel it in the way the room had shifted, in the quiet respect that wrapped around them like an invisible thread. And in that silence, he decided that whatever he had planned for the rest of the day, it would have to make space for this moment. He turned back to the crowd, his hand gesturing toward her. "Friends," he began, his voice steady now, "before I continue, I would like to say, sometimes, the greatest lessons do not come from books or from success. They come from the lives of people who have faced the hardest paths with grace." The audience leaned in, the words drawing them closer. Sundar knew he had their full attention, but his own attention was fixed on her, wondering what wisdom this quiet figure had carried into the room, and whether she might be willing to share it. Little did he know, the answer would arrive sooner than he thought, and not in the way anyone expected. The applause faded slowly, replaced by a silence that seemed almost alive. Sundar remained standing near Hiraba Modi, unsure whether to return to the stage or simply sit beside her. The choice was made for him when she looked up at him with a faint smile and patted the empty chair next to her. He sat down, the wooden seat surprisingly cold under him, despite the warm room. The young volunteer beside her, still holding the tray of water, hesitated before offering her a glass. She took it with steady hands, sipping once, then setting it down on the table beside her. Her gaze wandered around the hall, as if measuring the space. Then she spoke, her voice low and calm, but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "You were talking about the future," she said to Sundar, "but the future is nothing if we forget the soil where our roots began." The words were simple, but they cut through him in a way that data charts and polished speeches never could. He wanted to ask her more, but before he could, the event's host stepped forward, unsure of what to do. Sundar raised his hand slightly, silently asking for a microphone. When it was placed in her hand, she didn't stand. She didn't raise her voice. Yet somehow, every person in the hall could hear her. "When I was young," she began, "our home was small. The walls were made of mud, and when the rains came, the roof would leak. We had little food, sometimes only one meal a day. But my father would still invite travelers to share whatever we had. He said, 'If a guest comes to your door, they come carrying God's trust.'" A murmur ran through the room. She continued, her words painting pictures more vivid than any slideshow. "I have seen days when money was so little that I had to choose between buying grain and buying medicine. But I also saw that kindness does not need a coin, respect does not cost a single rupee, and resilience is built when you wake up the next day and choose to try again, even if you failed yesterday." Sundar watched her closely, realizing that she was not trying to impress anyone. She wasn't telling this to make headlines. She was simply speaking from a place so deep within herself that it felt unshakable. Then she looked at him directly. "You speak of connecting the world, but remember, connection begins with how you look into another person's eyes. It is in whether you listen without thinking of your reply. It is in how you treat those who can give you nothing in return." Her words reached beyond him, beyond the walls of the hall. People in the audience were still, their phones lowered, their faces thoughtful. Then she added something that made Sundar lean forward. "Once, years ago, I met a young boy on a train platform," she said. "He had no shoes, no bag, only a small cloth in his hand. The train was late, and it was raining. People walked past him without noticing. I stopped and asked where his parents were. He said he had none. I gave him my shawl. I didn't know then that he would grow up to be someone people would one day call a leader." The audience stirred. Sundar could feel the weight in the air of a person wondering who that boy had been. Hiraba's face did not change, but her eyes softened. "Leaders," she said quietly, "are not built in palaces. They are built in storms. Sometimes, all they need is someone to see them when no one else does." She stopped there, not explaining. Further, Sundar felt 100 questions burning inside him, but he knew this was not the moment to press her. Instead, he simply nodded, the truth of her words settling into him like rain soaking into dry earth. The event was no longer following its schedule. The moderator had stopped glancing at the program cards. The audience didn't seem to care. Every eye was fixed on the woman in the cream sari and the man who had chosen to leave the stage, to sit beside her. Sundar leaned slightly toward her. "May I ask?" "That boy on the platform," he said in a voice only she could hear, "what happened to him?" Hiraba did not answer right away. Instead, she let the silence linger until it became part of the room itself. Her fingers moved over the rim of her water glass as if searching for the right shape of the story. "He disappeared before I could learn his name," she said at last. "I stayed at the station until the night fell. The rain stopped. The vendors packed their baskets, but he did not return. I thought perhaps someone had taken him home, or maybe he had chosen to keep walking. She paused, looking toward the tall windows where the rain was still sliding down in thin streams. Years later, I saw a photograph in a newspaper. It was of a man speaking to a crowd in a small village. His clothes were simple. His eyes were the same as that boy's, full of hunger, but not for food. Hunger for change. I knew then that he had survived. Sundar felt the pull of her words, like threads weaving something larger than the room. "And you?" he asked. "What happened in your life after that?" She gave a small smile, one that didn't quite hide the weariness behind it. "Life happened. I lost my husband young. My children grew, but the world did not get easier. I worked in fields, in kitchens, in markets. I carried water from wells that were half a mile away. I never learned to read beyond the letters I needed to write a name, but I learned people. I learned how to see beyond what they say." The audience seemed to lean in collectively, as if they too were trying to see through her eyes. And then she asked something no one expected. She turned to Sundar and said, "You have built so much. You speak to presidents and kings. But tell me, when was the last time you gave your seat to someone tired?" The question hung in the air like a single drop on the edge of falling. Sundar opened his mouth, then closed it. He searched his memory, and the truth was humbling. He could not remember. The quiet in the room grew heavier. It wasn't an accusation. It was a mirror, and he knew everyone else in the hall had just looked into it. "We measure success," she said softly, "by towers, by screens, by numbers. But one day, when all of that is gone, the only thing people will remember is how you made them feel when you had the choice to do nothing." Sundar felt something shift in him, an unease that was not uncomfortable, but deeply awakening. He realized she was not just telling her story, she was holding up the weight of a truth most had forgotten. Just then, a sound broke the stillness. A child's voice, clear and curious, from somewhere in the middle rows. "Did you ever see the boy again?" Everyone turned to find the source. It was a girl, no more than 10, sitting beside her father. Hiraba looked at her, and for the first time, her smile reached her eyes. "No," she said, "but I have seen him in many others. Every time I see someone stand up for what is right, every time I see someone share what little they have, I see a shadow of that boy." The girl nodded, her small hands clasping the edge of her chair, and in that exchange, the room seemed to breathe again. The rain outside had softened to a faint mist, the kind that made the glass look like it was breathing. Inside, the warmth of the room felt heavier now, as if each person was carrying a piece of the story in their own chest. Sundar had almost forgotten he was supposed to be the main speaker. The audience had forgotten too. They were no longer here for slides or announcements. They were here for the truth that was unfolding in front of them. Hiraba rested her hands in her lap, her fingers folding and unfolding slowly. For a while, she didn't speak. It was as though she was deciding whether to open a door she had kept locked for many years. Sundar waited, sensing that the next words would not be light. "There is something I have never told in public," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "It was a winter night, long before that day at the train station. My youngest son was ill. There was no doctor nearby. The nearest was in a town 5 miles away, and we had no transport. I wrapped him in my shawl and began to walk. The air was so cold it burned my lungs, but I did not stop. Every step felt like it was stealing the strength from my legs. Halfway there, I stumbled and fell on the side of the road." She paused, and her eyes drifted somewhere far away. I thought, maybe this is where it ends. But then, I heard footsteps. A stranger, an old man, lifted me up, took the child from my arms, and said nothing. He just walked with me until we reached the clinic. My son lived because of him. When I turned to thank him, he was gone. I never learned his name. The room was so quiet now that even the soft hum of the lights could be heard. Sundar felt something tighten in his throat. And that is why, she continued, I believe kindness is a circle. What you give may not return to you directly, but it finds its way to someone, somewhere. And when you are in need, the circle comes back. Her words felt like they were settling into the floor, into the walls, into the hearts of everyone present. Sundar thought about the countless people he had met in his career, leaders, innovators, thinkers. So many spoke of strategy, of power, of vision. But here was a woman speaking of circles and kindness, and it felt more complete than any speech he had ever heard. Then, unexpectedly, she turned the focus back to him. Tell me, Sundar, she asked gently, what was the hardest day of your life? He hesitated. There were many hard days, leaving home for a foreign country with little money, moments when projects failed, the pressure of leading millions through uncertain times. But as he thought deeper, he realized there was one day that had shaped him more than any other. It was my first year in America, he said quietly. I had no friends yet. I had very little money. I remember walking into a store to buy food and realizing I couldn't afford even the simplest things. I walked out with just a loaf of bread, and as I sat on a bench eating it, I felt invisible. Like no one in the world would notice if I disappeared. Hiraba nodded slowly, her eyes warm but unblinking. And yet, you are here now. Someone noticed. Maybe not that day, but someone did. And perhaps now, you must be that person for others. Her words landed with the weight of a promise. Sundar didn't reply. He didn't need to. He knew she was right. The air in the conference hall felt different, now softer, yet heavier with meaning. Outside, the clouds were breaking apart, letting thin beams of sunlight filter through the tall windows. They fell across the audience in warm, golden streaks, as if nature itself wanted to listen. Hiraba sat with the same calm posture, but Sundar noticed something in her eyes flicker, like she was carrying one more story, one that had been waiting for the right listener. He leaned forward slightly, not wanting to rush her, but hoping she would share it. There is a truth, she began, that many people do not want to face. You can pass 100 people in your life and never know that one of them could have saved you, or you could have saved them. But sometimes, without even knowing, you are tied to a stranger by a thin thread. She paused, letting her fingers trace the edge of her sari. Many years ago, I was working in a small roadside tea stall. A man came in thin, tired, looking like he had been traveling for days. He sat alone, staring at the table. When I brought him tea, I noticed his hands were shaking. I asked if he had eaten. He said no, so I gave him food, and when he reached for his pocket, I told him it was not needed. He smiled faintly and left. She looked at Sundar, her voice low but steady. 10 years later, in another town, I was walking home from the market when a group of men blocked my way. They were loud, careless, and I felt afraid. Then one of them stepped forward, looked at me, and told the others to move aside. He walked with me until I reached home. When I asked why, he said, "Once, you gave me tea when I had no money. I do not forget." It was the same man. A quiet shiver seemed to pass through the room. The story was simple, but the meaning was not. Sundar felt it, the invisible threads between people. The way an act you forget can live on in someone else's memory. For years, Hiraba folded her hands again. "This is why," she said, "we must give without keeping count. The world is round. The path you take will cross another's again, sometimes when you least expect it." In the back rows, a young man wiped at his eyes. A woman in the front shifted forward in her seat. Sundar himself felt something in his chest, Lucena, reminder that even in a world built on numbers and deadlines, it was the unmeasured moments that carried the deepest weight. And then, almost without thinking, he spoke. "Hiraba, would you allow me to walk with you after this? No cameras, No speeches, just walk? Her lips curved into a small smile. If you can walk slowly, she replied, because I do not hurry anymore. A light laughter moved through the hall, breaking the heaviness just enough for everyone to breathe. The conference ended without the usual rush of people heading for the exits. Instead, many stayed seated, as if not wanting to break the spell of what had unfolded. Sundar and Hiraba rose slowly, and he offered her his arm. She hesitated for a moment, then accepted, her hand light but steady on his sleeve. They stepped out into the open air. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the ground damp and glistening. The air smelled fresh, as though the city had just been washed clean. A soft breeze carried the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers from somewhere. Nearby, neither of them spoke for the first few minutes. Sundar matched his pace to hers, their footsteps quiet against the stone path. They passed a row of small street vendors, some packing up for the day, others arranging their goods. Hiraba stopped at one, selling marigold garlands, and bought a small one, handing it to a young girl sitting nearby. Why marigolds? Sundar asked gently. Because they are bright, even when the day is dull, she said simply. And sometimes, that is what a person needs to see, a little light they did not expect. They walked on, turning down a quieter lane where the sounds of traffic faded. A group of children were playing cricket with a broken bat and a taped-up ball. Hiraba stopped again, watching them for a moment. One boy hit the ball into a puddle, splashing mud across his shirt. Instead of complaining, he laughed so hard that his friends joined in. You see, she said softly, happiness is not a gift someone gives you. It is a seed you grow yourself, even in poor soil. As they moved further, Sundar began to notice something about her walk. Every few steps, she would glance at the people around. The shopkeeper arranging mangoes, the old man fixing his bicycle, the young woman carrying her child and offer a nod or a smile. Each time, the person's face would change, if only for a second. He realized she was doing something that leaders often forget. She was seeing people, not as numbers, not as roles, but as lives. Finally, they reached a small public garden. The benches were damp from the earlier rain, but she didn't mind. She sat down slowly, her hands resting on her knees, and looked at him. Sundar, she said, you have built things that reach across the world. But remember, if your hand cannot reach the person beside you, the rest means little. He nodded, the truth of it feeling like a weight and a gift at the same time. You've given me more today than I can ever repay, he said quietly. Then repay it to someone else, she replied without hesitation. That is how the circle stays unbroken. They sat there for a long moment, the world moving gently around them, the distant hum of the city, the rustle of leaves, the laughter of children drifting on the breeze. And Sundar knew this walk would stay with him long after speeches and events were forgotten. It wasn't the path or the place that mattered, it was the company, and the lessons that needed no microphone to be heard. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the street as Sundar and Hiraba made their way back toward the conference center. The world around them had returned to its usual rhythm, cars passing, shop shutters closing, the smell of street food drifting from a nearby stall, but inside Sundar, something had shifted permanently. When they reached the entrance, a few people who had stayed behind stepped forward, hoping to take photos. Sundar glanced at Hiraba, and she shook her head gently. Let us keep this moment ours, she whispered. He respected that, without question. Instead of returning to the main hall, they stepped into a small side room with a single window overlooking the street. The rain-washed world outside glowed in the fading light. They sat there quietly, both knowing their time together was drawing to an end. Hirab broke the silence first. You know, Sundar, life will always ask for more of you. More work, more time, more answers. But you must choose what to give freely and what to protect. Your peace is not selfish, it is the place from which you give your best. He listened carefully, every word sinking deep. "You've taught me more in these hours than many books have in years," he said. "I wish I could bring your voice to every room I speak in." She smiled faintly. "You do not need my voice. You only need to remember the feeling in your chest right now. Speak from that, and people will hear me through you." For a moment, they sat in stillness, the air heavy with the understanding that their paths might never cross again. Sundar thought about asking for her contact, a way to stay in touch, but something stopped him. She was not someone you pinned down with numbers or schedules. She was someone you carried in memory, like a quiet song you could hum whenever you needed strength. At last, she stood. "I should be going," she said softly. "It's a long road home." He walked her to the exit, the street now lit by soft yellow lamps. Before she stepped away, she reached into the small cloth bag at her side and took out a folded piece of paper. She placed it in his hand. "Open it when you are alone," she said. Then, with one last nod, she turned and began walking down the street, her figure growing smaller until it disappeared into the evening. Sundar stood there for a long moment before finally opening the paper. Inside, written in neat, careful letters, was a single line: "When you cannot change the world, change the world for one person and that will be enough." He folded the paper again, slipping it into his pocket like something too precious to lose. The next morning, when he stood on another stage in another city, he spoke about technology, progress, and innovation, but he also told a story. Not the details, not her name, but the essence of the walk, the tea stall, the train platform, and the truth in her eyes. And as the audience leaned in, listening, he realized the circle had already begun to turn.